Father, I pray that you fill us with the Holy Spirit today through this teaching, that you fill me with the words of the message that you want me to deliver, and that you fill the listener with discernment and understanding that they may take this teaching and do with it what is best to you, whether they take it and say, aha, that's great, or they take it and explore it further, learn more from it, apply it, the teachings, to some aspect of their lives. We pray these things in Yeshua's name. Amen. Today, another controversial topic. The sons of God and the Nephilim giants of Genesis 6. Something that I think a lot of people will avoid whenever possible. And it's pretty easy to avoid because it's a very small portion of a very large book. Genesis is huge. And we're only talking about a few verses here, but it does kind of get passed over, I think, a little bit too quickly. More importantly, I think the interpretations, two different sets of interpretations, are based upon fallacies. Both of them. On one hand, you have the common teaching, the teaching that's been around for really since the beginning of the church, for reasons we'll discuss here shortly. And then you have a more recent, perhaps a better understanding of the words, a better interpretation, but it's one where I believe a lot has been added to it, and that's what I want to clear up as well. It seems that on both ends, they're both trying too hard to not see the truth. And so we're going to try to cut it straight through. What do the words say? What is God telling us? What is the true meaning of these verses? And it's not that complicated. It really isn't. But let's start off with Genesis chapter 6, verse 1 and 2. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. It's a very straightforward verse. Bottom line. You look at the one interpretation, the most common one in the churches, the one that's been around for quite a while, and that's that the sons of God, that phrase is allegedly referring to the sons of Seth, the holy sons of Seth, and that the phrase the daughters of men were referring to the ungodly, the bad daughters of Cain, and this is not a correct interpretation. Start with sons of God. This is a phrase in Hebrew. It's B'nai Ha-Elohim. It's very common. It's used all the time, and every time it's used in the Bible, it's referring to divine creations. Okay? Divine creations. It could be angels, and I think that in this particular case, we're talking about angels. But there are other quote-unquote sons of God referred to in the Bible, but never is it a man. Other than you can say, of course, Adam, and Adam was a divine creation. He was not born from other men. He was born from God created him. And then everyone else after Adam was created from man. Eve was created from man physically. All of their offspring were offspring of men. They were not necessarily sons of God. We are not sons of God. He is our Father, but we are not His sons, not as of yet. When we are translated, when we reach heaven, when we get our heavenly bodies, I think that perhaps at that point we will be considered sons of God, but that's speculation. And we don't like to deal with speculation very much. Now, the daughters of men, again, this is in the Hebrew, it's the daughters of Adam. There's no reason why it wouldn't have been just spoken as the daughters of Cain if that's what they were talking about. They are not. They're saying that angels came down and saw human females. They thought that they were beautiful and they took wives. Now, there are two reasons why this interpretation is unpopular, why it's not used. You can trace it all the way back to the beginnings of the church. You can trace it back. If you look at the 1599 Geneva Bible, the footnotes just absolutely butcher it. If you look at pretty much any of the Bibles out there, they either don't give commentary on it or the commentary is almost always incorrect. There's that reason, and here's the thing. A lot of it is, I would assume, blushing interpreters, a blushing church. They didn't want to go to the early churchgoers and say, hey, these angels that we've been telling you about that are so awesome and they're protecting us, and there's some of them that were bad, and they came down and they took wives for themselves. That's kind of it's a tough pill to swallow for an emerging church. The other reason is actually a little bit more. I guess there's a little bit more sensibility to it. It's referring to several verses in the Bible where they talk about what happens in heaven versus what happens on earth, what the activities of angels versus the activities of men. One in particular, Matthew 22, verse 30, for in the resurrection they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are as the angels of God in heaven. This is the words of Jesus, and so a lot of pastors, a lot of Bible scholars will point to this and say, look, angels didn't even need to get married. They didn't need to procreate. There's no reason for them to have done it. In fact, they couldn't have done it because here's Jesus saying that as the angels of God in heaven. But there's a note. There's something to take notice of, I should say, and that is that in here Jesus is talking about the resurrection. That he's telling the Pharisees that when we are transformed, when we are translated, when we are called to heaven, given our heavenly bodies, that we are no longer going to be getting married. And that, I believe, is absolutely true. Of course it's true. Jesus said it. But here's the thing. We look at the portion of the verse that says, as the angels of God in heaven. I think the key part there is that the angels of God in heaven. There were angels that came down to earth. We know that. We know that the Bible very clearly tells us this, as well as do extra biblical texts such as Enoch. I'm not going to use those because we're going to stick it strictly with the Bible here, but even the Bible makes it clear that there were angels that would come down to earth. And these angels weren't these incredible glowing 15-foot tall monsters or even angelic beautiful beings with wings and everything like that. The Bible clearly tells us that they have very humanly forms. We always have to be careful. You never know when you're entertaining an angel unawares. We know that they were not recognized in many of the places they went, and there's other verses that show them as different creatures. So especially you read Ezekiel, the beginning of Ezekiel tells of an angelic set of creatures that are pretty darn crazy. Revelation, there are different types of forms that angels can take on earth and different types of angels, but we also know that there are angels that can come down to earth. And my contention, my way of reconciling this portion, these verses in the Bible, is to assume that yes, angels can come down, they can be compatible with humans, and the evidence of that will be coming up shortly. But first, let's go to move on to a verse that I think it's important only in that it's the next verse. It doesn't really apply to this particular teaching, but why skip one single verse? It's a quick one anyway. Genesis 6, verse 3, and the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is flesh. Yet his days shall be 120 years. We know that before that time, and for a little bit after that time, that men had long, long, long lives. They could live for hundreds of years. Methuselah almost lived for 1,000 years. It was pretty insane, the length of life. But God was going to do things that would shorten their time on earth. I think that this verse was not inserted into this point as by accident. The flood has something to do with it. I think that the way that the earth existed at the time, that God didn't simply just put water on the earth, kill everybody, and then bring it back to the way that it was. I think there was something that changed during the flood. And again, we're getting into speculation, which I want to avoid, but I don't think that it's an accident that nestled right in between some weird verses about giants and fallen angels that we have this verse here about men's lives being shortened. And as it turns out, it's pretty darn true. How many people do you know that live past 120 years? They say that our lifespans have been increasing over the decades, over the centuries. There was times when people were lucky to live to see the age of 40. And now with changes in medicine and diet and circumstance and technology, and of course everything that we do to try to keep people alive longer and better and make them healthier, we still can't seem to very often break that 120-year mark. Interesting. Okay, let's move on to the next verse, and this is where it gets really weird. Genesis 6, chapter 6, verse 4. There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. The same became mighty men which were of old, men of renown. This is one of the very, very few verses of the Bible where I can actually say that the NIV translation is better, or at least closer to the original, than the King James. Both the NIV, the NASB, most translations that you look at, they don't say giants, they say Nephilim. Nephilim is a word, has a couple of meanings. It's always referring to the same person, but depending upon the or the same type of people. But depending upon the interpretation, it can either mean giants, which we know that they were. It could also mean fallen ones, which does make sense. I'm not going to go into. We get into a long discussion about what that means, what the Nephal, what the fallen ones truly were, and what that represents. But here we can state that they were giants. They were huge. We know that, and that right there should pretty much put an end to any concept that the earthly righteous sons of Seth went into the earthly but unrighteous daughters of Cain, and somehow created giants out of them. We know there were giants. The Bible speaks of giants. When God had Joshua send spies to the land of Canaan, they came back saying that the the inhabitants in the land that they were supposed to go to, 8 of the 10 didn't want to go forward because they were terrified. They said we were like grasshoppers to them. I don't think that was metaphor. It's not like these were cowards. These were men who had witnessed some tremendous military victories. And they didn't say that we were outnumbered. They said that these were giants, that they were huge, and they made 8 out of the 10 scared. That should tell us something. That should tell us that the words that are used are the exact right words. These were giants. How did the giants get there? I'll get into that here in a bit. We'll talk about that, but especially when we talk about the next portion, I guess the next challenging objection here. But at this point, I think we can wrap up the whole concept, the whole thought that these were human men and human women somehow making giants because, for whatever reason. First and foremost, I do not believe that would be obtuse enough for God to be concerned enough to put it in there. Secondly, I don't think they could create giants. You need something much more powerful, much more divine to take a human woman and to have her bear giants. Okay? So that should be, again, that should put it into that portion. I think that, again, that particular misinterpretation, the whole idea of sons of Seth, daughters of Cain, that it's almost harmless. It's one of those things where it's like, well, regardless of what somebody thinks, how does that apply to us today? I'll get into that a little bit more deeply here shortly. But I think that it's important that every part of the Bible, when we're reading it, we need to know exactly what it says. We cannot take for granted that a misunderstanding and misinterpretation can change a portion of our worldview. That's why accuracy, context, these are words that we try to stick by. When I'm reading the Bible, I almost always have not just a concordance, a digital concordance, but I like to keep Strong's open and available so that I can, if I want to make sure that each individual word is exactly what I think it says, exactly what the interpretation thinks it says. And I've found on many, many occasions in the past where what I thought a verse was saying turned out to be saying something completely different. We can go into examples of that if we have time at the end. But for right now, I want to move on to the second portion, the second, I don't want to call it deception, the second misinterpretation. And it stems around one verse. We're going to skip ahead a little bit to Genesis chapter 6, verse 9. These are the generations of Noah. Noah was a just man and perfect in his generations. And Noah walked with God. It should be noted that even though the word generations is used twice in the same sentence, there's actually 2 different Hebrew words that are used. And this is a point of contention for many. Some respected Bible scholars are saying that this is why the flood came. It's not just because men were wicked. It's because the Nephilim, the giants that were on the earth, that they were the reason. God was trying to wipe clean the generations, the bad seed from the earth. He was trying to correct the errors of the angels. The angels came down, the bad angels came down and created this hybrid race of beasts and Nephilim giants, and God was trying to wipe them out. That's why He brought the flood. And Noah was clean. When it says he's perfect in his generations, that means that he was free of angelic past. Basically, his bloodline was clean. He was pure human, so to speak. Now, this might be true. I don't believe that's why the flood came, but it might be true that that Noah was chosen specifically because he had this clean bloodline, this clean history. I would actually say that's probably very likely. But here's the thing: to believe that, to understand that, is one thing. To attribute that to the reason that God brought about the flood, as so many Bible scholars do, I think is a deeper misinterpretation than the whole sons of Seth and daughters of Cain concept. And here's why. We, as humans, we have a tendency to try to find fault in others. It's not just, in this case, it's finding fault in the angels instead of humans. In some cases, we try to find fault in other people, other races. It's always somebody else's fault, and it's human nature. It's part of what we do. In this case, I think that the scripture is very clear, and whether or not Noah was pure it's important. It's an important portion of the story, but God destroyed the earth because we were wicked, because we were violent. Let's look at some verses to demonstrate this. We'll go back a few verses to Genesis 6:5-6. And God saw that the wickedness of man was great on the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Not mincing words there. It's pretty clear. God did not say anything about, as I really wish that the angels hadn't come down and polluted the bloodline. I wish they hadn't come down and taken human wives. I wish they hadn't. No, this is man. Man was wicked. Man was violent. Man, every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Nothing about the Nephilim aspect of it. There were some bad people on the earth in those days, and apparently a lot of bad people. One can think that Noah was the only righteous one. Maybe there were a few. Maybe Noah was selected out of a small group of righteous ones. Who knows? But we do know that it has nothing to do with angels. Let's look real quick at Genesis. Skip now ahead a bit. Genesis chapter 6, 11-13. I'm going to read it quickly. The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. And God looked upon the earth, and behold, it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. And God said unto Noah, the end of all flesh is come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them, and behold, I will destroy them with the earth. Now, again, this is one where people will say, "Wow, corruption." That's where he's talking about it. That's what by corruption he's saying that the bloodline was corrupt, and that's not what the Bible says. That's not what this verse says. I've looked at every word. The interpretation here. This is one I guess you could say is a little bit less clear. You could see it as, well, that corruption is the corruption he's talking about, but it's a stretch. It's a big time stretch. You'd have to fit that verse into your view that God brought the flood to clean out the Nephilim bloodlines. You'd have to start with that to interpret verse 12 as the corruption, for all flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. In this case, way, the Hebrew word for way, in this case is truly a way. It's not a methodology. It's like a way, as in a path, as in a road. And to make the jump that this is evidence, it's not. It could go either way, and I think that logic and proper hermeneutics would tell us that this is talking about we were violent, we were evil, we were bad people. Noah was pretty darn good, but he walked with God, but everybody else, they needed to go. Again, no mention here of angels. And then we look ahead not ahead. We look over to Matthew chapter 24, verse 37 through 39. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away. So shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Okay, so this is where it gets dangerous. This is why this teaching that the flood came to eliminate the Nephilim bloodline. I've heard several, not all of them, but several of the Bible scholars who hold to the concept that God was wiping that particular slate clean. They point to this, and this is their further jump, that not only were we corrupted back then by the angels, not only were the bloodlines corrupted, and not only was God trying to kill it all off back then, start from scratch, start without any Nephilim bloodlines, that it's also going to be like that in the future. And we're making a huge stretch here, especially when it's Jesus is very, very clearly stating exactly what he means when he says, as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Because he says they were surprised. They were eating, they were drinking, they were marrying, they were giving in marriage, all until the day that Noah entered the ark. They didn't know the flood was coming. They didn't know until it actually came and took them away. It doesn't say in here that so shall it be, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be, that there will be giants in the land in those days. Now we'll cover that part shortly. And this is, I think, the case closed portion of it. But if you read these verses, and again, if you take it from an open-minded perspective, if you don't try to work in the whole Nephilim reasoning for the flood, then you can come out of this with an understanding that we were bad, and that's why we were wiped out. Trying to blame it on the presence of the Nephilim, I think, is a big mistake, and it changes the prophecy, the meaning of the prophecy, and that's where we get into some real danger zones. We don't want people to continue to look for giants. If there are giants out there, we'll know. Jesus gives us very, very clear signs. I don't think we need to be looking for 12-footers out there. We need to be focused on, I think, more real and more tangible and more likely scenarios of the end times. I'm not going to say that it's not possible. I'm not going to say that I think that there might be giants out there today. I also don't want to make it sound as if the Nephilim fallen angel concept in Genesis 6 needs to be dismissed. I just don't think that I think it needs to be taken at face value. That there were angels, they came down, they mated with the daughters of men, and they created giants. And God, at this time, was also looking at the earth, and he saw that men were wicked. Not just the men who were offspring of the fallen angels and the human women. I think that it was all men. And so we cannot displace it. We cannot attempt to basically, I don't want to say excuse. I don't think people are trying to excuse it, but I don't think we can work the Nephilim reasoning into this text and still do it justice. The text is clear. And I think that if we read the text for what it says, then we'll have a better understanding of it. I guess the easiest way to achieve this is to go back a couple of slides, a couple of verses, go back to Genesis 6:4, and again, it says, there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that. That should be it. Case closed. If God had intended the flood to wipe out everybody, specifically to get rid of the giants, then that was an awful lot of death for a mission that failed. Okay? There were giants in the land after Noah, after the flood. Like I said, they were in Canaan. There were there were plenty of giants available. Okay, pick your giants. There were the Emim, the Zuzim, the Rephaim, the Anakim. There was Goliath. There were giants throughout the Bible after the flood. So to assume that God was trying to wipe out the Nephilim and he destroyed every bit bit of life on Earth, except for either 2 or 7 of each animal and 8 human beings, and that his mission failed, I think is wrong. I think it's very clearly incorrect. Now, some will say, and this is where we get into speculation, this is, I think, a safe speculation because I don't see any other way around it. Some will say, well, if God killed everybody and everything, and including the Nephilim and including anybody out there, then how are there giants after the flood? And there's only two possibilities. There's an infinite number of possibilities because all things are possible with God, but there are two, I guess you could say, scientific two possibilities that fall under the line of whatever genetic understanding. Either the flood did not kill all the Nephilim. Actually, I should say there's probably 3 possibilities. Either it didn't kill all the Nephilim, maybe somebody hid on the ark, maybe they escaped somehow, I don't know. The Bible doesn't say that, so we can't. The Bible says that all of the life was killed, so I think that possibility should be eliminated. So now we're down to the last 2, or option 2, that other angels came down after the flood and started over, picked out more women to have children with, and I don't think that the text says that at all. And I also don't think that. I think that God's awareness of those shenanigans happening is enough to prevent it from happening again. Again, I don't want to get into extra biblical text, but there are indicators outside of the Bible that would suggest that this wasn't the case. So option 3, that there was some giant blood, so to speak, some giant genetics on the ark. And I think that's the most likely the case. This could be a much longer study, longer than I want to talk about today. But one possible speculation is that the wife of Ham, who basically was the mother of the Canaanites, which would make her potentially the mother of the Anakim and many of the giants, that perhaps she had some tainted blood. God only says the only clean blood, if you believe in the generations concept, the only clean blood was Noah's that we know of, and we can assume that that Noah's wife was clean, which would mean that Noah's sons were clean as well. But what about the 3 wives? And this is where I believe that it's very possible that the reason there were giants in the land in those days and also after was because one or more of the wives had that genetic coding, that Nephilim coding, within their bloodline, which I believe that, again, and we can go into further detail. This is all speculation. This is nothing in the Bible, but it would make at least scientific sense. So, what does all this mean? How do we apply this today? Why is it important? First and foremost, I think that it is a great litmus test for a church. Today, between the internet, between conferences, between the teachings at schools, this is a good litmus test for your pastors, the pastors at your church. If they are teaching the concept of the sons of Seth and the daughters of men, I would ask them why. And of course, they'll point to many verses. They might say that this is what they've always been taught. They can look at the ancient Bibles and see that was the way it was described. But the evidence, I think, is pretty clear, and I think they know it. And now we have to determine why. Why, after knowing it? Why, after learning about it? And I don't want to put words in anybody's mouth. Maybe they just didn't know. In which case, if that's the case, hey, send them this video. But if they do know, and they're still hiding the truth, they're still preaching the wrong interpretation of Genesis 6, I would want to know why. Because, again, the Bible is perfect. And if the Bible is perfect, then interpretations can be the imperfections that keep the Bible from being truly alive within a church, within an individual, within a nation. And so, having the right interpretations, having the right understanding of the biblical texts is important. It's not something that should be easily dismissed. So there you go. First and foremost, litmus test. Secondly, I think that it's important for us to know the history, know what happened and why it happened. The thought that, we all know that there was at least one fallen angel. Everybody knows that Lucifer, that Satan was an angel, and that his goals, his desires, his attitude towards God, his perception of himself made him fall. We know of at least one, for certain. And we also know that there were more than one. If you look at the book of Jude, Jude talks of the fallen angels. There's several points in the Bible that discuss, at least in passing, or at least insinuate the idea that angels had left their first estate, and that first estate, I believe, is heaven. They came to earth, for whether they were sent or whether they came of their own accord. They came down to earth and they messed some things up, and as a result, they are punished, were punished, and will be punished again. We will judge angels according to Paul. So, can't wait for that to happen. I hope this was useful, and I encourage you to check out some of our other teachings. We try to go focus not necessarily on the things that everybody's talking about, but the things that are important, the things that maybe your regular everyday pastors aren't talking about. And we really just go where we're led. Unfortunately, there's no rhyme or reason to the videos we post. We do encourage you to support us, not with money. We won't take a penny. I'm very averse to any financial gain whatsoever, even if it's just to operate the church. We'll do this on our own. We're covered. God will make this ministry run. God will provide. We don't need donations. We don't want donations, but we could use some support. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can follow us on Facebook. You can go to our blog. We're pretty much everywhere, and we're trying to be as active as possible. So that type of support, sharing, commenting, participating, getting the right words out to the right people at the right time, whether it's us or somebody else, that's something that I believe is part of being a true disciple to Yeshua, to Jesus Christ. It's J.D. Rucker with Judeo-Christian Church. God bless you, and shalom.